In the last video, we focused primarily on all of that internal uncertainty that was present within the early Christian faith. And that was probably the most serious and significant threat to the continued survival of the Christian faith as something at least somewhat unified. The concern, again, was that there could be such radical fragmentation if everyone understood what it meant to follow Jesus in a different way. Fortunately, we saw the formation of the canon and the structure of leadership that really were used by the church to help stabilize itself at a time of so much uncertainty. Of course, there were other threats to the survival of the Christian faith, and these were coming from outside. You obviously had continued disagreements and tension between Christians and the Jewish religious leaders who did not accept Christ as the Messiah. And perhaps more importantly, you had times of very significant persecution of Christians by the Romans. And this would kind of ebb and flow through the decades and centuries of the early church. Sometimes there were emperors that showed more toleration toward religious minority groups like Christians. Other times, things would set off some of these emperors, and they would get very angry and upset and worried about the growth of Christianity. Remember, Christianity is one of the world's great missionary religions. It wasn't like Judaism. While anybody can always convert to Judaism, the Jews, historically, have not actively sought converts. And what that meant at that time in history, and really throughout much of history, is that the number of Jews really only increases based on the time and the speed at which Jews can procreate. Christianity was very different. Christianity from its outset was very active in seeking converts. And you have stories even at the early days of the preaching of Peter and Paul where thousands of people would convert to the Christian faith on any given day. This was more of a concern, therefore, for the Roman Empire. Even though Jesus was no longer here, this was still a minority religious group who wasn't practicing what was Roman religion at that time. And this group, unlike a group like the Jews, was rapidly growing. And there was always that concern that perhaps this group could seek to rebel against the Roman Empire or seek to destroy the Roman Empire, at least in its control over much of its territory as Christianity continued to spread throughout the Roman Empire. Of course, we know historically that despite the severity of these persecutions, they were not ultimately effective. Tertullian, whose name I've given here, who becomes a really important figure in a lot of different ways for the early church. He's actually the first to coin the word Trinity, which doesn't show up in the Bible, but he coins that term to start to think about the nature of God the Father and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. But Tertullian has a very famous line that has always been remembered throughout history. He wrote, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." And what he meant by that was that rather than harming the growth or stopping the growth of Christianity, the early martyrs who died for their faith at the hands of Roman persecution actually helped to grow the church. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. What Tertullian recognized is that when Christians saw their brothers and sisters in Christ die for their faith, that actually gave those Christians who were left alive a greater sense of commitment and purpose as Christians. It also seemed to make non-Christians perhaps wonder whether there was truth to this Christian faith now that you saw people being willing to even die for their commitment to the faith. So Tertullian is this very important figure who has this famous line about how serious the persecution was at times, and yet how Christianity survived and perhaps even thrived despite this persecution at the hands of the Roman Empire. Now, this will continue really through the 2nd and 3rd centuries and up into the early 4th century. But by the early 4th century, everything is going to change for Christians in the Roman Empire because of primarily one individual, and his name is Constantine. He is the Roman emperor. He actually is able to unify control over the entire Roman Empire. Prior to that, and in the future, there would be co-emperors. one situated in the western portion, one in the eastern portion. But Constantine is able to have unified power over the entire Roman Empire, which includes a vast territory of land, especially for this time in history. And Constantine will actually stop the policy of persecution against Christians at the hands of the Roman Empire. Yes, some earlier emperors maybe did not persecute Christians too strongly, but Constantine is the first to radically put an end to the persecution of Christians throughout the Roman Empire. And the question for scholars always, of course, is why? Why did he do something so unlike his predecessors when it comes to the relationship between Rome and the Christian faith? And there have been a variety of answers given. Perhaps the most famous answer is that Constantine himself becomes a Christian. And that would make sense. If he becomes a Christian, why would he continue to persecute followers of his own faith? Now, the story of his conversion is actually very dramatic, and it is generally recounted to us by a bishop at this time whose name was Eusebius. And Eusebius tells us that Constantine was always involved in a lot of military battles to defend his role in the empire, his rule over the entire empire, maybe to defend the empire itself against outside forces or to extend its territory. And one night before a very important battle, Eusebius tells us that Constantine has a vision in the sky, and the vision is of a cross. And underneath the cross are the words, "Conquer by this," or sometimes, "Conquer by this sign." Now, Constantine, as the Roman emperor, he is very well aware that that cross is the symbol for the Christian faith, the faith that his predecessors had seen fit to persecute for several centuries because of the threat that the growing Christian faith perhaps represented against the Roman Empire. And now Constantine is told that he should conquer by the cross, which seems to suggest that maybe the Christian faith and the God of the Christian faith is actually not an enemy of the empire, but perhaps the God of the Christian faith is the true God, and now it seems that that God is actually wanting to help Constantine in this battle the next day. This probably blows Constantine's mind when he sees this vision. But in case it's real, he goes ahead and has some of his soldiers put crosses on their shields as they go into battle the next day. It's a wonderful victory for Constantine. And according to Eusebius, this confirms to Constantine the truth of the Christian faith, the reality of the Christian God, and the fact that the Christian God and the Christian faith actually seek to help the Roman Empire as long as the Roman Empire will befriend the Christian faith and not continue to persecute it. So that's the general story that we've been given. But there are some issues with this story. Most importantly is the fact that Constantine, while he does stop the policy of persecuting Christians, and he does start to promote Christianity in some ways, also continues to seemingly promote Roman religion, which Christians would have considered pagan religion. So for example, on currency, he might have a Christian symbol on one side of a coin, but when you flip the coin over, there was a symbol of the Roman religion. Now, we know his mom was very committed to the Christian faith. She even eventually financed the building of important churches that still exist to this day that are pilgrimage locations for Christians from around the world in the Holy Lands. But again, the story of Constantine, we just simply aren't sure about the sincerity of his own conversion experience. We don't know how genuine the account from Eusebius actually is. Perhaps it's true, but maybe scholars wonder there was another reason that might have at least supplemented the conversion story in making Constantine change the Roman Empire's approach to the Christian faith. And this is where I borrow a phrase that I first saw from Mark Knoll, who's one of the best church historians in the world today and has been for quite some time. But Mark Knoll says that Constantine may also have changed the policy toward Christians based on a political calculation. Right? Up until this point, Christians were seen as a threat to the Roman Empire, and that's why they were persecuted. And what Knoll says, and other scholars have put forth a similar argument, is that maybe Constantine realized that Christianity could be used to help unify and stick together the Roman Empire. right? This is where we get this idea of a cultural glue. The idea is that at this time in history, the Roman Empire is made up of so many diverse cultural groups who speak different languages, eat different kinds of food, wear different kinds of clothing, that it becomes very difficult to help unify everybody as part of the Roman Empire. After all, the last thing you want is for a group to think of itself primarily as a member of this smaller community rather than as a member of the Roman Empire, because that could eventually lead to rebellion and revolt against the Roman Empire, right? It's why some in our country get a little nervous when perhaps Texans maybe think of themselves as Texans first and foremost, and some of them want to maybe secede from the United States, because again, we kind of like the idea of everybody trying to be Americans and maintaining some sense of unity, even despite the many differences and disagreements that we have. And of course, as Americans, we recognize all of those differences. I could put you on a plane ride to Fargo, North Dakota, and then to East LA, and then to some little town in West Texas, and then to Manhattan, and then to Little Havana in Miami, and you would see very quickly that we have a lot of very diverse cultures represented within the United States. Constantine was dealing with something quite similar in the Roman Empire. And we, of course, have found ways to help unify us despite the many differences, right? You could get off of that airplane at any of those locations on a Friday night in October. And I would bet you that within 20, 30, 40 miles of that airport, you will come across a big field of grass with a bunch of spotlights on it on a Friday night in the fall. And you will probably already figure out be at a high school football game, right? Sport helps to unify a nation despite all of its diversity. Whether we like it or not, and whether everybody follows it or not, that's kind of beside the point. It's one of those cultural symbols that helps unify a great deal of diversity within a nation. No matter what music people might be playing as they get closer to that football game, there will be one song played at most of those high school football games, the national anthem. No matter what clothes they might be wearing, there will be one piece of cloth flying over that football stadium, the American flag. Now, again, we see some arguments about some of these cultural symbols and what they might stand for different groups, but this is just an example of the way in which we try to unite everybody despite the many differences. In Constantine's time, it was difficult. You didn't have TV and radio and the internet so that everybody felt kind of glued together. It was very hard to maintain a sense of unity. And what Noel suggests is that perhaps when Constantine was looking around the empire for something that could transcend all of the cultural differences, there was one thing that he kept finding no matter where he looked, and it was the Christian faith. The Christian faith seemingly transcended all of those cultural, linguistic differences. It was found everywhere. It didn't matter what people wanted to eat or what clothes they wanted to wear or what language they spoke. The Christian faith was seemingly for everyone, and so many different groups from around the empire were accepting the Christian faith. And maybe Constantine had a genuine conversion. We don't know. But maybe part of the reason why he changed the policy from one of persecution to one of friendliness is because he recognized the way in which Christianity could be used as a cultural glue to help unite everybody within the empire. With so many Christians in every corner of the empire, if Rome became a friend to Christianity, this would help minimize the possibility of rebellion and would help keep everyone hopefully satisfied to be subjects of the Roman Empire. Right? So this is a really important decision made by Constantine. It begins the move of Christianity from a persecuted minority religion to what will eventually be the official religion of the entire Roman Empire. Right? Now that won't officially happen with Constantine. That won't happen until the end of the 4th century under the rule of Theodosius. But with Constantine, you have the toleration of Christianity and, in some ways, the friendliness toward Christianity that will start that process. And eventually, by the end of the century, Christianity will be the official religion of the entire Roman Empire, which puts it in a very different position with so much power than what it had to start the century when it was still facing persecution at the hands of the Roman leaders.